Politicians in Prague this week will be debating a measure that would legalize same-sex marriage in the Czech Republic. That's just one of the top international stories of the coming days. And with me for our weekly look at some of them is the BBC's Rich Preston. And Rich, the Czech Republic is, of course, not the first country to have this debate, but what is different about this one?
Yeah, that's right, because, Mark, if the Czech parliament ends up legalizing same-sex marriage, it'll be the first former communist country to do so. Unlike its neighbours in Central and Eastern Europe, same-sex marriage has broad support in Czech opinion polls. At the moment, same-sex couples in the Czech Republic can register partnerships, but LGBT groups say that falls short of marriage on things like inheritance and adoption rights. So the debate this week is over a proposed amendment to the Civil Code, which would allow full marriage equality. Here's the BBC's correspondent in the Czech capital, Prague, Rob Cameron.
It's opposed by conservative and religious groups and also many same-sex couples themselves who argue partnership is enough. But supporters say public opinion is with them and, crucially, so are many MPs.
Now, that amendment would need a simple majority in the 200-seat House. About two-thirds of the country say they support expanding the current civil partnerships into full legal marriage.
Now, Rich, if the Czech Republic goes ahead and approves this, that would really, as you alluded to, set them apart from some of their neighbours.
It really would, Mark. Yeah, at least their neighbours to the east, Poland and Hungary, have forbidden same-sex marriages. And while Slovenia has civil partnerships, they don't have full marriage or adoption rights for same-sex couples. This is all the legacy of a communist-era rejection of homosexuality tied in with Eastern Europe's strong religious traditions. It's not a done deal in the Czech Republic, though. There's a separate movement within the Czech parliament to change the country's constitution to define marriage as being between one man and one woman. So the debate begins on Wednesday. We'll have to wait and see what happens.
All right, so that's Wednesday. The following day, on Thursday, there may be a move for some of the Rohingya Muslims who are currently in refugee camps in Bangladesh to be repatriated back to Myanmar. Does that mean the situation in Myanmar has actually improved?
Quite simply, no. Now, you may remember more than 700,000 people fled Myanmar into Bangladesh. They said they were being persecuted by the Burmese military. There were stories of men and boys being killed, women raped, and homes being burned. Now, after that mass exodus, an agreement was reached between Bangladesh and Myanmar for some of these people to go back home. That could, as you say, happen this week. But the United Nations has called for the agreement to be halted because the situation in Myanmar hasn't improved. Many of the Rohingya are afraid to go back. Here's our correspondent in Myanmar, Nick Beake.
The UN, for its part, says even if they are moved back, aside from the question of whether this is voluntary or not, it's simply not safe for them to be back. And at best, they'd just be joining the other 400,000 Rohingya people who live in Rakhine State, who the UN and others say face a bleak existence where there's no freedom of movement. Many are confined to camps. They've been there for 6 years since a previous wave of violence. There's no education, there's no access to healthcare. The last time a Rohingya student enrolled at Sitwe University in the main city there was back in 2012.
That's Nick Beake in Myanmar.
So, Rich, what does Myanmar say about all that?
Well, the government there says that they were fighting a separatist rebel movement and that many of the homes were burned by the fleeing Rohingya themselves and not by the Burmese military. Myanmar doesn't consider the Rohingya to be Burmese. They aren't allowed to have citizenship from Myanmar. And even the country's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, has resisted calling the people Rohingya. She simply refers to them as Muslims. That repatriation due to happen, if it happens, on Thursday.
All right, Rich. And finally, tomorrow there's another court hearing in a case involving the wife of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What is she accused of?
Well, this is an interesting one. The Prime Minister's wife, Mark, is accused of corruption. She's alleged to have spent $100,000 of public money on food bought in from restaurants and gourmet chefs, despite there being a chef employed at the Prime Minister's residence, also paid for by the Israeli government. Mrs. Netanyahu denies the charges. At an earlier hearing, she was asked if she would accept responsibility and repay the state for all this food, but she said her legal team had advised her to fight the charges.
And am I right, this is just one of the legal problems facing Israel's first family?
Yes, that's right. There are several corruption cases being considered against Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister. He denies them all, saying the accusations will come to nothing. Last week, Israeli police recommended bribery charges for Mr. Netanyahu's lawyer as well. And at the start of this year, an audio tape was released featuring Mr. Netanyahu's son, bragging that his father benefited personally from a controversial gas deal. The family's lawyers said the tape was cheap, vicious gossip and that it was a bad joke and part of a witch hunt against the Prime Minister. That hearing involving the Israeli PM's wife due to resume tomorrow.
All right, that's the BBC's Rich Preston. Rich, as always, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.